My name's Tim. I'm Chief Product Officer here at Ably, and joined by Srushtika, who is the amazing product lead for the Spaces product. Who's really been a driving force in understanding all of the needs that you have for building collaborative applications and building it in public over the course of the last few months. So we're really thrilled today. I'm going to give a little bit of context up front and talk a little bit about collaboration. But really, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So we're going to really turn it over to Srushtika right away. It's going to show you some code, going to show you some demos, show you how easy this is potentially to add to your experiences to get this collaborative benefit. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to talk just for a minute at the beginning, and we talk about collaboration, but really, collaboration isn't anything new. It's been part of the internet really since its earliest days. Email collaboration, right? You're working with a colleague across the internet, and that goes back to what, the late 60s or early 70s. We had bulletin board services in the 80s where folks were posting messages back and forth to each other. Saw the emergence of chat rooms in the 90s. AOL chat really revolutionized the way of bringing people together online. But something really fundamentally different happened in the 2000s, maybe into the teens, that took collaboration to a whole different level, right? And with it, some really dramatic changes came into the competitive landscape. So just want to talk briefly about a couple of examples, and we'll talk about what they had in common and some of the challenges that they faced. So first, everybody knows about word processing. It's been around again since the dawn of, pretty much the dawn of the personal computing era, and was dominated by really one incredibly dominant player, right, with Microsoft Word. And if you had gone to someone in the 90s maybe and said, hey, do you think that something could come along that would topple the dominance of Microsoft Word, it'd be hard pressed to think. It was so feature rich and had such dominance in the industry, it'd be hard pressed to think of something that could topple it. But fast forward just a few years, and we have Google Docs come on the scene. Right, Google, everyone thought of as a search engine, suddenly comes out with collaborative experience for what Word had been doing all along. Right, so now suddenly you can collaborate with other users, you can have comments, you can have app mentions that can tag people who you want to follow up, even to the point of collaborative text editing, where conflict resolution comes into the editing process. And unbelievably, Microsoft Word is still around. In fact, the collaborative features in Google Docs have pulled Microsoft Word into the collaborative experience as well, but really disrupted what was, really a difficult industry to imagine that could be disrupted because the notion of word processing was so well established. Another example, I worked for Adobe a number of years ago, and around that time, the design tool market was really tied up by Adobe, right? If you think about the Creative Cloud suite of tools for designers who were building digital experiences, there was really no other tool in the market. And then along comes Figma, right? So going back a little more than 10 years now, into the mid-teens, Figma came along with cloud-based tools, so two components, cloud-based and real-time collaboration for teams of designers. And really dramatically transformed that space competitively in the same way that Google Docs did to Word. The result was similar too. Not only did Figma come in and disrupt that market and achieve significant dominance in the space, but it pulled the incumbent forward and brought Adobe into a much more modern era and a much more modern way of working. So now collaboration is expected within design tools. If you thought of a designer today having to work with a client and not be able to collaborate in real time on those assets, it's almost hard to imagine. The final example I'll give, not even a digital experience, right? Working together face-to-face in an office was something that pre-pandemic we had some ways of being remote, but a lot of that experience we never thought that we could replicate. But then along comes a product like Miro, where we take a lot of the interactions that we would have in a conference room at a whiteboard, moving sticky notes around and marking up each other's drawings and collaborating on this two-dimensional surface, we bring that same experience now into the digital world with a tool like Miro, right? So these are examples of areas where there was such an understanding of how an experience worked that suddenly, by adding this idea of collaborative and real-time experiences, just added an entirely new level of value to customers for those. So if we think about what were the attributes that are in common around all three of those, it's really quite simple. The first is awareness of other users, right? In the pre-collaborative days of word processing, it was just me and the tool. It's on my desktop. I might share that file with other people and email it to folks, but there was no real inherent awareness of other users, certainly not in the time when I'm using it and not in that experience. Second part, they all have this notion of managing state, right? If we're collaborating on something and you're looking at one version or one view of the content that we're collaborating on, and I'm not in a synchronized state with you, there's going to be problems. We can't collaborate if we have a different view into things. So all of these tools had to solve that problem of managing state. And then finally, they're delivered through a browser globally to anyone in the world with an incredibly low latency experience, right? So this is another part of the real-time aspect of collaboration. If we don't have the feeling that we're in there together at the same time collaborating, working on something, if there's a lag or a delay, it just breaks the magic of the experience and actually can have a negative impact on collaboration, because I might not trust that I'm actually seeing the same thing that you have. So we want to make sure that no matter where you are in the world, you can access the software and it feels real-time enough that the user has a high degree of trust that they're actually having the experience together. So some of these things, and looking at what happened in these disruptive technologies over the last few years, here at Ably, we have developed, our own sort of philosophy about this, right? And fundamentally, we believe that online experiences are better when they're real time. If more than one person, colleagues, collaborators, can share something in real time, that's just a richer, more valuable experience that can be had online. And ultimately, if you're building your business around engaging users, you want them to be engaged, you want them to have a great experience, and you want that experience to be sticky, right? Therefore, to build on real-time is shared, right? So those real-time experiences are fine if you just want to get real-time sports scores or real-time inventory in a warehouse management application. That's great, but it takes the real-time element of it to a whole new level when we can share and collaborate with other users. And then finally, we believe that these access to these collaborative real-time experiences shouldn't require really special expertise among technical teams, right? To build that kind of low latency global infrastructure, manage some of the complexity of state that I mentioned before, those are some pretty difficult technical tasks. And we really believe that you should be focused on the business value that you bring to your customers, not on infrastructure, not on state synchronization, none of those things. So you shouldn't have to bring specialty skills for real-time and collaboration. You should focus on your business and leave that complexity to someone else. So what does that mean in terms of bringing collaboration into your app? Well, what we see with working with many customers who are building solutions in this state, in this space, are really kind of two parts. On the one hand, we see experiences where collaboration enhances an existing process or an existing experience, right? So this is where you can take something like data processing, a form, a workflow, and by putting some collaborative experiences around it, it makes all of those experiences better. It reduces the likelihood of user error. It gets a richer, stickier experience for users, right? On the other hand, are cases where the collaboration itself is core to the experience. So Miro board, right? Without the collaboration, Miro is just kind of like a drawing tool. The fact that it's collaborative is part of the real core benefit of it. So as you're thinking about bringing collaboration into your applications, you might want to think which of those two categories are appropriate for you. Do you want to augment and deliver a richer experience to what your product already does by bringing multiplayer collaboration on top of it? Or do you really want to build an experience where collaboration is core to the value of it? Both are valid, and both are going to deliver the same types of benefits, right? Which are higher level of user engagement. They're going to be stickier. Your users are going to stay in there longer because they're working with other folks, and ultimately competitive differentiation, right? That's what we saw with Google and Miro and Figma in the examples earlier. They were able to differentiate through these collaborative features. So given all of that, why, as we look around today, aren't every application collaborative, right? Well, it comes down fundamentally to some core challenges. Claire Butler from Figma was on Lenny's podcast recently about this kind of moment in 2015 when Figma was trying to come out of stealth mode. And they had built their initial features and were pitching multiplayer. And they were really eager to come out of stealth mode, but they weren't ready with the multiplayer features. And they said, well, we can't come out of stealth without that. But their CTO, Evan, at the time said it was going to be over a year before they'd be able to add those collaborative features to what they had built already over multiple years in stealth mode. It was just a massive undertaking. So they took the risk of actually going live without collaboration and then added those features later. But it gives you a sense of where some of these challenges come from. Back then in those days, with these initial kind of pioneers in collaborative space, well, they had to do what Figma did, right? They built large engineering teams and they spent a long time creating these features. Chances are you don't have that, right? But even today, if you had a long time and had a large team with the right skills to be able to do this, there's still a lot of really complicated challenges. We talked about this global real-time high availability system. To scale that is quite difficult. What if you might be all right with a couple of users, but as soon as you start to add hundreds, thousands, or millions of users, right? Specialty expertise, we talked about this idea of the challenges of managing state, right? And then finally, if you look around at tools that you might leverage to build collaborative experiences, there's so many different ways to do this by piecing together various technologies that might be sprinkled around the internet, that it's very difficult for organizations to know what's the best practice. How do we build these correctly? And so you end up spending a lot of time exploring and investigating, which takes time. So high value, but really high barrier to entry for delivering these types of experiences. We talked to lots of our customers and other folks who are building these things and decided Ably was in a great position to change all of that. So that's what we're here to show you today, is the solution, and we call it Spaces. With that, I'm going to stop yapping and let Srushtika come in and show you what's possible with Spaces and how you can start using it yourself right away. So Srushtika, come on in. Let me.
Awesome.
I'm going to switch you to presenter.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Nice. And can you see my screen? Oh.
We're still just seeing your camera. There we go. Great.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Got it.
Awesome. Right. So thanks, Tim, for setting it up very nicely in terms of this need in the market right now. And obviously, the big question is, how are we solving that issue for everyone that's on the webinar right now and other people? And that is by, we've built this new product, which we're calling Spaces. Like Tim said, Spaces as in virtual collaborative spaces that you can add in different areas of your application. Now, before I jump into further details and all the features and like code and everything that's part of this new product, let me give you a little bit of backstory. Some of you may know that Ably, as it stands right now, provides a hosted real-time messaging infrastructure as a service with SDKs in a bunch of different languages and platforms using which developers are able to leverage this kind of a pub-sub messaging pattern that can be used to build all kinds of real-time applications. This hosted infrastructure is currently supporting over 350 million unique users and over 500 billion messages per month, including for customers like HubSpot, Mentimeter, Split, and the likes. And this PubSub channels product also comes with a bunch of features which are really useful, like presence for connection management, rewind, history, a bunch of integrations to connect your to the other systems in your system design, etc. But what we've noticed is that while these flexible channels are incredibly useful for developers who know exactly how the real-time messaging part of their application should be architected, essentially from the ground up, it's sometimes a bit too much flexibility for others who are just looking to implement a bunch of collaborative features quickly and move on to other priorities in the business. And as you saw with everything that Tim presented, collaboration is the need of the hour. These kind of features are essential to stay relevant, to sort of overcome competition or even catch up to competition if some of your competition is already there. But the fact is that at the end of the day, you still have functional business requirements that you need to continue to develop on, and collaboration can't take over the entire thing. And that's where Spaces comes in. It's essentially a new product which provides a set of higher level APIs so that developers can build team-centric products and ship scalable and reliable collaboration features without necessarily spending the time to learn the tech or write the boilerplate code. Now, I'm gonna basically dig into what this means throughout the rest of the presentation. So hopefully it starts to make sense when we come back here. Right, so let's dive in and see some of the features that Spaces enables and how all of this I have on screen is achieved. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Spaces landing page directly on the web page right now. Looks like some people are already there. You can feel free to jump onto that. It's ably.com/spaces. And what you'll see there is we've essentially tried to add a collaborative virtual space in the header part of this page so that you can actually get a taste of what all the features are enabled by this SDK right now and how that looks like. So there are 4 features right now that are powered by this product. As you can see, there's the avatar stack. I can see exactly which other collaborators are online, as well as people, just as you see with the gray one, the people that have recently left. I can see live cursors. As you can see, a bunch of people are coming on. It's really good because in a virtual space, usually it's very useful to see the live cursors because they tell you behavioral cues in terms of what they are looking at. And based on that, you can sometimes predict what they might be intending to do next. And that's, all of these unsaid things when you're not necessarily on a call, in addition to collaborating on the page, are very useful for productivity. Then the third one is something we call member location. This tells you what exactly within the collaborative space people are working on right now. That's demonstrated using one of these 2 boxes. So for example, I can click on this or this, and you can see that my avatar, which is AL, is sort of jumping around between the 2 boxes. Essentially, you can think of it as showing the live selection of people in terms of the UI component they're active on, or the page, if it's a multi-page application that you've set up a collaborative space on, etc. Just so you know what exactly people are contributing to in a space. And then finally, there's something we call component locking, and that can be seen using a slider here. Now, when I select the slider, I've just now realized that with GoToWebinar, there might be a bit of lag. So you'll probably see this in a little bit of a few seconds delay. But basically, when I've selected the component, the slider here, it's essentially locked the component for me, and other people should not be able to now edit the slider. But essentially, it allows me to change the opacity of the letters here, and that is until I click elsewhere, at which point other people can sort of pick that up and change the opacity. To understand the true value of component locking and these other features, I'm also gonna show you another specific demo in the right context before I talk to you about the code as well. but there are a bunch of code snippets here as well if you wanted to take a look. So let me jump into this application, which is a slide deck demo that we built, so that there's a bit more context around how these features might look like when we build a collaborative space around existing applications. So I've shared a link in the chat. I'm going to wait for just a couple of seconds because I know there might be a lag from when you were seeing the video to when we're actually doing the thing or collaborating in space. So I'm just going to wait for people to pop up here. All right, we see people coming on. Right, so let's see. We have, again, like the same 4 features that I was talking about. There's the avatar stack at the top. I can see randomly assigned names of people that are currently online in this slide deck editor right now. I can see member location. This is in 2 forms. I can see the slide using these little sort of avatars based on which I can tell which person is on which slide, or I can also see which UI component someone has selected on a specific slide. You can also see that in the little sort of preview on the left, which is handy. Then there's live cursors, of course. If I'm, for example, just like faffing around here, it's either that I'm trying to point at that when we're not necessarily on the call, or I'm, that's something I'm looking at, so I can work on it next. And the one that I was talking about is component locking. Now imagine, some really, big applications like Google Docs or whiteboards where a bunch of people are contributing to the content of the doc. Now it makes sense because the doc is so huge for multiple people to be, sharing content. Like, for example, if it's a 10 paragraph page, then it makes sense for one person to be adding content to the first paragraph and the second person to be adding content to the 10th paragraph. But imagine some other kinds of applications which are a bit more structural. Let's say a form builder, a slide deck editor like this one, or a CRM. Now, to give you an example with a CRM, we use the CRM at Ably, and Faye and I, my colleague Faye and I, we were trying to publish an article using the CRM. And there are these different fields that we can enter text in that will end up going on the page. Now, at this point, we were basically both on the title section, and we were trying to basically see what's going to happen, because I could see Faye was on the title section as well, but I was sort of waiting for her to start typing something because I wasn't sure if she was going to add an input. So it just like I was waiting around because it was not clear, and there was a lot of confusion on what's going to happen. Because we didn't want to step on each other's toes, but at the same time, we did want to collaborate on the article at the same time to sort of make sure we are we're utilizing the time efficiently. So you can see all of that confusion coming up. So that's where component locking really comes in handy, because as you see, when I have a component selected here, it's not only showing my location, but it's effectively locked my component. I can show you here when I hover on these other components that someone else has logged, I can't really edit them because they've essentially, even though I'm able to collaborate on the slide deck as a whole, the atomic component, the atomic UI component itself is locked by people. It's just useful, right? Because for me as a collaborator, it just shows me that someone has locked it, they're working on it. So I don't need to wait around. I can do my own edits later on in a different place and then come back later to see if that's done. And when you click elsewhere, that lock is essentially released. So those are essentially the 4 features that Spaces does right now. I did want to touch on one more thing here, which is this idea of participant state versus app state. Essentially, in the slide deck editor, what you see as the, there are 2 different types of states essentially that exist here. The states that are being streamed in real time. There is one, which is the state of the application itself, and that could be the content on the slides, the number of slides, the images that go on the slides, and everything that is to do with the application itself. And then there's this other kind of state, which is to do with participants. How many participants are there, where exactly they are, what their pointer status is, what their location status is, what their lock status is, etc. And you can really start to see the difference between these 2 different kinds of states, and the different sort of treatment they need to get within the system architecture and system design overall, right? For example, this title and everything that goes into the slide deck most necessarily needs to go to your own backend. Considering this is a real application, it needs to go to your servers. Probably, maybe you have a profanity filter to check that no bad words are input in any of these sections or anything before it is streamed back to the collaborators. Or maybe you just need to store it in the database for long-term persistence. So 2 days later, when people sort of open this up, it is still retrieved directly from the database, etc. So that's definitely required for the app state. However, for this other kind of state, which is participant state, things like cursors, locations, locks, and avatar tags, it's very unlikely that you might ever want this data to go touch your backend, because it is relevant when there is a synchronous collaboration happening at the moment, and it really is not much relevant afterwards. You can obviously send it to your backend for storage or analytics if you need, but you can have the option to do that. And by separating these two ideas of participant state and app state, we're able to sort of give you the option to say, right, all of these features can just be peer-to-peer, mostly ephemeral state, just goes through Ably and reaches directly the participants, never needs to touch your backend. But whereas the application state can be built as per what your system architecture and system design is. And that brings me to the fact that Spaces is built on top of existing Ably SDKs, and that fact essentially allows you to use any of the existing Ably features like channels and presence to extend any of these features to build a more sort of end-to-end functionality. I'm gonna touch upon more of that in a bit, but let me now go and show you a little bit on the code of what actually enables these features. Now, I kept saying high-level APIs, right? And I'm going to show you why. So the full code for that demo is here. It's written in React, but I'm not going to go into that because it's got a lot of distracting code in terms of the UI and the components and CSS and all of that. Instead, we have this other folder called examples, where essentially the Ably part of the logic is just extracted out and kept here so that I can just run you through that quickly. Right, so let's go through all of the 4 features one by one. Like I said, because Ably Spaces is built on top of existing Ably SDKs, we do need to import both of the libraries. Then there's some sort of user-defined methods to show the UI, to update the UI as per the updates happening. Then we start by creating a regular Ably client by passing the right type of authentication details. We then pass that client to Spaces to initialize the Spaces SDK. And then we create a new space by giving it a unique ID. For example, for the slide deck that I was just showing, it could be slide deck 224. And that's it. That's essentially my collaborative space. And you can decide what, according to you, makes sense to be a collaborative space inside of your application. For example, for the slide deck that I was showing earlier, this entire slide deck is essentially a collaborative space. But you can decide to have just a single slide to be a space, or even the file explorer, where you get to choose between the different slide decks that are available in your drive. You can imagine that being a collaborative space, and you can see which slide decks are being used by which people at a given time, etc. So you get to decide which part of your application or your entire application needs to be a single collaborative space. But once you have that, you set it up, you basically enter your users in that space using their profile information. It's usually things like name, the color their profile needs to be represented by. For example, here, this FJ person is represented by blue, and that's handy because when we show like the member location, we show the same color, so that's all synced up. You can also imagine a URL that shows a profile picture of someone to be used in avatar stacks and things like that. So all of that information you can send when entering the space, and that's pretty much it. All you have to do after that is subscribe to the updates on space.members, and every time a member enters the space or leaves the space, you get a trigger here And based on that, you just update your UI based on whatever that means. For example, if I have an avatar stack, I'll just remove the person that has just left from that stack. If I get a trigger that someone has left, but I still want them to be there, I can just set a timeout to make sure that they're appearing for 2 minutes as with the last seen status of, left X seconds ago or 1 minute ago, etc. That's pretty much it. And you can also, you have the option of sort of subscribing to specific events only, like leave or enter, or if, based on your use case, if you want to subscribe to just a single type of event happening. Now that's avatar stack. Live cursors is really interesting because unlike some of the other features, you can imagine the number and frequency, number of messages and frequency of messages that get generated. For example, if I just move my cursor from this position to this position, you can already see that it has generated hundreds of points, XY coordinates of my mouse pointer that now need to be streamed to other people for them to show my pointer movement accurately. Now, in a naive implementation, that's exactly what we would do. Everything that the mouse pointer generates, I'm going to immediately publish on Ably in real time to other people to sort of consume. It's almost wasteful because it's such high frequency that it's just not worth publishing all of those events in that original frequency to everyone else. And when you start to think about these kind of efficiency problems, you start to think about ways such as batching the messages. So maybe you want to batch 5 or 10 or 100 messages together in a single message and publish that in one go, and have the subscribers on the other end, because Ably preserves the order, they just like consume that batch and replay it in a nice animation for other people. And all of this at the end of the day is happening so fast anyway that there's hardly any lag that can be noticed despite batching a bunch of messages. However, you can already see that this is everything that you need to do. This is all the boilerplate that you will need to write each time you want to implement live cursors. And so it's things like these that we have sort of encapsulated directly within the SDK and these APIs. So you don't have to do any of that. For example, let's take a look at live cursors, right? Until here, it's exactly the same thing. You set up spaces, you create a unique space, and you enter the person with their profile details. All you need to do with the cursors API after that is subscribe to cursors, and you will get an update whenever someone else's cursor position has changed. And you basically just see which person's cursor that is, and render a nice looking cursor on the screen and animate it nicely on the UI. All you need to do to publish your cursor is exactly that naive implementation. I'm just listening to mouse move events, looking at the XY coordinates of my pointer, and just publishing everything using space.cursors.set. I'm not thinking about any of the batching mechanisms, any of the efficiency mechanisms. The SDK is doing that for me, which is pretty handy, and that's making the SDK a bit higher level compared to some of the other pub/sub messaging patterns. Now, location is again exactly the same thing. Until here, you set up spaces, you enter the person, and if you want to subscribe to location updates from other people, you essentially say space.locations.subscribe, give me all the updates, and your own location you set using space.locations.set. So you can imagine in a slide deck, whenever I'm changing the slide, whenever I'm changing the element, I can just do space.locations.set. I can trigger this with the actual location that has changed. And in terms of the location itself, that's completely user-defined. Whatever location means to you in your application, you can set that to be your location. For this slide deck demo, it made sense to say there's an ID for a slide, and then there's an ID for the actual element on that slide, which is why it is of the format, slide, and element ID, slide ID and element ID. But essentially, when you subscribe to those updates, you get stuff like member, current location, and previous location. Again, that's quite handy because what you're doing in your own sort of UI method is you take away, let's say I'm showing the border in a specific color to demonstrate the location of a person. Whenever this is triggered, I remove the border from the previous location, add the border in the current location, and add the color and the name of the member that has actually caused that change. And that's pretty much it. I don't have to do anything or make a bunch of decisions in terms of how exactly to architect it. And finally, when it comes to locking, again, until that point is exactly the same thing. We set up spaces, enter the person, into the space. Essentially, this is a method, space.logs.get, that allows you to check the status of any given lock using an ID. And let's say, this element is what I want logged. So I'm going to first check if this is logged using that. If it is in, then I will attempt to acquire that lock using space.logs.acquire. And that's pretty much it. You have a subscribe method called space.logs.subscribe, where you can listen to all the updates on the locks that exist within the specific collaborative space that you've set up. And this will give you what locks exist, what the status of that is, if it's a lock that is acquired by a specific member, or if it's a lock that is released by a specific member. And you can have additional attributes like the location or where exactly the lock is. And based on that, you can, for different members, say if they're allowed to edit, or if they see sort of like a disabled cursor like I see right now here over Carol, because they're editing right now. Nice. Awesome. So that is all the 4 features. Now, if I come back here, like I was saying, there's this idea of participant state versus app state, and Spaces is actually placed very well because it's built on top of existing channel product. It's placed very well to sort of give you the end-to-end sort of real-time functionality to be built within your app. You can imagine different kinds of features, not just those 4, but different kinds of features coming up. The ephemeral participant state type features could be continue to be added into Spaces in the future, but you already have access to channels, pub-sub channels, if you wanted to deal more with app state and get your database or backend involved. There's also notably this really interesting product that's coming up, relational database sync. We're calling this product, I think, Live Sync. Essentially, it allows you to optimistically update your UI, even for app state, and then make sure you have confirmed updates coming up after you have confirmed it with your backend. It also allows you to sort of subscribe to change events within your database without needing to poll the changes, so you can make sure database is the single source of truth. So you can start to see how you can very quickly get started with adding a bunch of collaborative features that are really useful, give a really nice end user experience within your app, make your app sticky, make your product sticky, and allow people to collaborate by staying within the app instead of jumping around between Slack, Zoom, or any other combination of different tools. I'm gonna go back here. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share. I'm gonna bring it back to Tim for some surprise reveal.
Great, thanks, Srushtika. That's terrific. Let me go back into the slides. Just one thing that I really like, we talked at the beginning about this idea of being able to just kind of gradually start bringing some of these collaborative real-time capabilities to your app. I love the example that you gave of just a simple text field, right? How many apps out there have, a simple text input? And if 2 people happen to be editing that same record at the same time, field locking is a really simple way to do conflict resolution, right? We've spoken to customers who say simply letting another user that, hey, I'm working on this, is enough to avoid a lot of the complexity that would come with like real-time conflict resolution. So that was a great example of something that, with just a couple of lines of code, you can kind of quickly add that to any existing application, right? Great. So let me go back to the slides here. We're pretty close to the end. I want to leave some time for questions here, but before we go on, I just wanted to mention, Srushtika said built with React. Ably now has React hooks available within the JavaScript SDK, which will allow you to, all of that real-time capability that Srushtika was talking about, with broadcast and notifications and data sync coming up soon in the future, to have a way for you to work with that in your React applications. Hooks for Spaces specifically for this set of features that you saw today, that's coming soon. And if that's something that's interesting to you, do let us know, and we'd love to give you early access to that as well. But otherwise, just watch in the next coming days at this point for that. So great. If folks have questions, you can use the GoToWebinar control panel to pop some questions in there. and we can answer either about the capabilities of the Spaces SDK or really about the approach to bringing collaboration or multiplayer features into your products or any other topic. So feel free to do that if anyone has any questions. Let me go over here into a different window. Where can I find the example code you walked through? Yeah, thanks. So I posted that in the link to that demo is in the chat. From that page, you can access the code for that example app, but also back on Ably's website, there's a section for examples in which we have, I don't know, Srushtika, probably half a dozen or more individual standalone examples, which you can see working there in the application, but you can also go to GitHub and clone that repo and take that code for yourself. So all that code's available. Srushtika, did I miss anything?
No, that's all good. I'm gonna share the link in the chat as well.
Great. Have another question in here about a sync feature, and would that be useful for live document editing? Great question. So the database sync that Srushtika mentioned is solving a slightly different problem. What that's used for is to automatically synchronize changes that are happening in a backend database with connected clients. So keeping the client state in connection to the backend state. This would be kind of the thing like you might have seen in something like a Firebase, right? Where magically the changes that happen in the backend database are broadcast out and synchronized with client state. Think about things like inventory updates where they're happening in a backend database. But to your question specifically about live document editing, that's a slightly different one, and I mentioned that at the beginning with Google Docs and things like CRDTs. That's something that we're going to be adding to the Spaces SDK probably quite soon. If that's something that's interesting to you, if you go to our website and contact us, we'd love to get you involved. We'll give you some early preview to some capabilities around collaborative editing. Let's see. When will React hooks be available for Spaces? Yep, so I mentioned React hooks for the general Ably SDK. Specifically, React hooks for Spaces are coming in the next, it's a matter of weeks, very close to it. You can see, however, in the sample app that was built with React, so you can take a look at how we did that today. Once we ship hooks for Spaces in the matter of coming days, it'll just be a little bit easier, a little bit more idiomatic way to use React with it. Okay. All right. Great comment about CRDTs. Looks like some interest in being involved with that. That's great. If you are interested, again, let us know. We'll make note here from the Q&A, and we'll reach out to you about collaborative data with CRDTs. And let's see. Last one. Great. Let's do this one. Last one. Does Spaces have a way to handle arbitrary state for individual users? I immediately got thinking about whether Spaces could handle this user is typing feature in chat apps. Yeah, you don't actually even need to use Spaces. That's something that you can do with Ably natively. But Srushtika, do you want to talk? Maybe is there some specific benefit of participant state for a use case like that?
Yeah, I mean, like you might have seen on the landing page that I was showing, there might be in the future, if there's enough sort of need for that, we might have direct APIs for doing these kind of things that capture the UI events as well that trigger typing and not typing type things directly into an API. But as Tim was saying, it's very easily sort of shareable directly as a trigger on a channel, as a message directly on a channel. Right now, within, for example, Live Cursors API, you do have a way to send arbitrary state along with the cursor position. This could be data related to, let's say, the component that someone might be dragging along with cursors, if you want to show that and capture that as part of the state as well. But there's not a separate way individually to share that kind of thing right now within Spaces.
But again, with simply that example of typing indicator, we have lots of folks who are building chat, powering chat with Ably today, and that's a very common feature that we use the basic Ably SDK for. One question about the database sync, when is that available? So again, if you go to Ably, you'll see live sync or data sync. I'm not sure what we have on the products menu for that. That's available in an alpha now. So you can go and get that on GitHub. The database connector at this point in the alpha is for Postgres with the connector listener, and then we have an alpha of the SDK part that can help synchronize the client state. So you can take a look at that database connector and the SDK on GitHub today. But we also have a sign up on that page if you want to hear more or get involved when that product's a little farther along. We're actively developing it right now. So take a look at the alpha or sign up on that page on our website to be contacted when we have it in a beta state or available for other backend databases. Let's see, just two more. When a user joins a space, do they automatically get the current participant state of other participants, or do you have to wait until they get an update event? Srushtika, you want to talk about that life cycle of becoming active in a space?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think, like, I won't imagine any scenario where you're part of the space, but you necessarily want to wait until you get an update event, and that's what we did. As soon as you enter the space, in the response event, you also get the current context, or like the state of the space itself, which is the participant state, tells you which members are online, what their locations are, what their cursor positions are, if that's relevant, and what their sort of locks and the statuses of the locks are. Actually, I'm going to take that back. Cursors is sort of handled by a different channel. So cursor positions you won't get automatically when you enter the space, but the rest of the states you would get as soon as you enter.
But then that cursor state comes, you know, in a close on the heels.
Yeah, I mean, you need to basically like subscribe to cursors separately anyway. So when you do that, the previous cursor position comes through that as well. But it's just that the two are separate subscription events.
Great. Yeah, and then it looks like a last one here. How's that different from presence? I'm not sure if the question is just in general about state in space being different from presence, but well, Srushtika, why don't I leave this to you about the abstraction of this on top of presence in natively and Ably?
Yeah, I mean, presence is really good to handle this connection status management and sort of build things like avatar stacks natively directly on channels. But when you start involving things where the avatar stack needs to sort of sync with some of these other features like cursors and locations, it starts to become a bit complex, and some of the things are more efficient to be streamed directly on channels versus some of the features sort of benefit from the fact that presence has a state that can be sort of synchronized and streamed to other people. And what we found while speaking with a bunch of our customers is that there's often a lot of confusion in terms of which best practices to follow and how to actually, which of the features to put together, whether it's channels, presence, history, and how to put those together to build these features is a bit of a question mark. We do have a bunch of architectural patterns, and we're creating a bunch more for many use cases. But with this, because we thought, you know, anyway, we're building high-level APIs, so that would be a nice abstraction. And as a result, you can see that some of the features, like avatars, are directly powered by Spaces behind the scenes, but some other things like live cursors, because of the frequency involved and the other sort of efficiency mechanisms, optimizations involved behind the scenes, are actually streamed directly on channels and not via presence. I hope that answers.
So at the end of the day, again, you know, we saw lots of Ably customers building some of these natively with the core primitives in Ably, and from that we were able to kind of build these best practices into the Spaces SDK. So similar, you know, under the same underlying architecture as Srushtika said, that also means you get that same global high availability, the low latency network on which you've been using Ably natively. Just it makes it a little bit easier, a little bit more straightforward for developers, and with a little bit quicker access to all those best practices that we've learned from helping folks like yourselves over the years.
An interesting thing to maybe like add there is the fact that when we start to separate this participant state and application state, it gives us an opportunity to consider different kinds of performance optimizations for these features. For example, for the application state, you want each and every message to be reliably sent with guaranteed delivery to all the subscribers. But if you think about live cases, you probably don't need that as much, and you can afford to drop a couple of messages in between as long as you're getting the final state at the end. So you can see like the direction in which, like if you tell us that this kind of optimizations would help with your use cases, we'd be in a position to sort of support those kind of things. So we'd really appreciate any feedback on these APIs.
100%. Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Srushtika, for walking us through those examples and the code behind them. Thanks everyone for all the great questions. You can follow that QR code on the screen or just come to Ably. If you already have an account, you can start using Spaces right away. If you're new to Ably, we have a great free tier for the product, and all of the capabilities in Spaces are usable and accessible with the free tier. So it's a great way to just get started trying to bring these collaborative features into your application right away. So we can't wait to hear what you do with it and do with the product. Do let us know. And we're always here if you have other questions or if we can help in any way. Otherwise, thanks. Have a great rest of your day, and good luck building the next generation of amazing collaborative experience. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Al.